Thank you for joining me today, Charlie.
Thank you for having me.
What are you up to these days?
These days, as you know, but probably not your audience, I am, reliving being a dad again. I think my wife and I just had our second kid, so I've been, fresh off of paternity leave. Still trying to stay up to date with all the latest AI stuff. Difficult when, there's a baby that needs your time and attention, but yeah, doing my best to keep up.
Cool. And yeah, it's a pleasure talking with you. As I already told you before we recorded, I've been following your newsletter for quite a while. And it's definitely one of my go-to sources to get the kind of broad overview about AI and what's going on for everything related to AI. So I'm curious, what made you go into writing on Substack?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing. I think in a what feels like a different life now, I actually published a book a long time ago. And writing's always been a big passion of mine. So has technology. And I think for me it was around the time, that ChatGPT was coming out. I had seen GPT-3, I had seen like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, but much like billions of other people, I saw ChatGPT and was kind of astounded at what it could do. Shortly after, there was GPT-4, and other types of models. And I remember turning to my wife and just sort of saying, like, I don't know how big of a deal this generative AI thing is going to be, but I'm pretty confident it's going to be a really big deal, right? And even though my day job had nothing to do with AI, I decided that I wanted to start learning for myself and publishing essentially the things that I was learning right on Substack. And so that's how I initially got started. Like any creative endeavor, the first probably 6 to 12 months of it was like not very good, but you just try to get a little bit better and you just try to keep doing it.
So, a lot have happened in the last 2 years. Um, what is your view on AI compared to how you started?
Um, I think I would say most of the big things I've thought about AI have probably stayed the same, right? I think it is a very weird technology. Most technology we're used to being more or less deterministic, right? And large language models are probabilistic, meaning that you're not guaranteed to get the same results every time, right? It's also technology where, for the most part, even its creators are not very confident about what it's going to be great at and what it's going to be bad at, right? And sort of the whole world is doing the field research in real time. Um, I think I've probably changed my mind, around um, how quickly things will progress, right? Which is not to say that it's slow. I think it's still insanely fast, right? But I think initially I had sort of the engineer mindset of like, oh, if you build it, everyone will just start using it, right? And as is often the case, reality works a lot more slowly than that, and it takes time for people to adopt AI. It takes time for companies to like bake AI into their products and into their workflows. And so I think the rollout has been probably slower than I would have initially thought. Um, it's still to me an open question too on where the where this level of intelligence is going to plateau, right? AGI is sort of the big headline for all of these labs, but I think it's still a very open question on whether we'll get there.
Who do you think it will benefit the most?
That's a really good question. I think from the from the developer standpoint, right, from the creator standpoint, right, I think it's likely going to benefit primarily um, the incumbents, right, like the labs, the handful of labs that are actually building this technology. And I think for the most part, when you sort of look at where their investment is coming from, a significant percentage of it is coming from like big tech companies, right? Like Microsoft has poured tens of billions into OpenAI. Google and Amazon have done, single digit billions into Anthropic, right? Google also owns DeepMind. Um, So I think like from the, who is it going to make rich? I think it's probably the large tech incumbents. I think when it comes to like who benefits from it as a user, um, to me that's actually the more interesting question because uh, AI, generative AI seems to be this technology which is really great at lifting the floor um, in terms of skill sets. It is, I think, still a little bit unclear how good it is at raising the ceiling, right? I think we find if you look at studies in the best cases, humans plus AI do outperform humans alone and AI alone. Um, but I don't think it's as simple as like telling people, here's ChatGPT, go prompt it, and all of a sudden you're going to be better at your job, right? If you are a top performer, I think you have to figure out how to make it work for you. Whereas I think if you're somebody who, is not as productive, I think we're finding that it actually is pretty good at raising the floor pretty quickly in terms of getting additional productivity.
And I know you come from a background of software engineering. I've heard many differing tales about how AI will impact the work of software engineers. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of big questions, especially within software as an industry, right? I mean, there's a lot of fear in general about job displacement. I'm not an economist, so I don't know how qualified I am to comment on it, but I am a software developer, and I think it's clear that um, right now, right, assuming the models did not get any better, um, we are at a place where it is likely going to augment the vast majority of software development, but I don't think it's at a place where it's going to replace the vast majority of software developers, right? I think the big asterisk on that statement is except for junior developers, right? I think junior developers are in a lot of trouble, or the types of software development work that is like, offshoring basic Ruby on Rails web app development, right? I think that is in a lot of trouble as a niche. Um, and I think we're trying to figure out, if you don't have, at least I'm trying to figure out, if you don't have junior developers getting employed as easily, right? If you're replacing them with Claude Code or with Cursor, um, while it might, save you money or time in the short term, what does that mean for the long term? Because where does the next generation of senior developers come from when you stop hiring and mentoring junior developers?
And I suppose that's an issue that is relevant across all fields, but the software development has kind of taken, um, a step past most other fields. For example, legal work. What are you most concerned about in regards to AI's impact on your work?
Uh, it's maybe this is a selfish answer. I'm concerned that I'm going to become over reliant on AI and um, basically my own cognitive abilities are going to decline, right? I am less worried about AI, replacing me or automating me out of a job, because the way that I look at software development, the hard part of creating software has never been hitting keys on a keyboard, right? Or punching holes in a punch card, right? All those decades ago. The hard part has always been how do you take a real world problem, whether it's for a business or, for yourself or for some other entity, um, and translate the messy, fuzzy real world requirements and constraints, um, and then turn that into, you know, lines of code, right, that a machine can run. Doing that translation step is the hard part, right? And certainly, AIs are getting better at that, and I think you're finding that a lot of um, managers who used to code who no longer code, or product managers who are tech savvy but never got a formal computer science education, they're seeing tons of benefit from AI coding agents because they are able to articulate the real world business problem that they have into the language of the large language model and get out a translation that is lines of code. Um, but I think if you're an individual software developer, to me that is the skill set that you bring to the table, right? I think it was Kent Beck from Software Design Tidy First who said, as an engineer, 90% of my skill set has just gone to zero, but 10% just got 1,000 times more valuable, right? And so being able to identify and strengthen that skill set is, I think, um, how I see kind of my goal for the next few years as like we're figuring out where the software AI is going to land.
Do you think there is a parallel between coding and writing? Is it the same challenge?
In some ways, I think so, right? I think the hard part of writing is not, for me at least, right? It is not pressing the keys into the keyboard, right? It is thinking about what am I trying to say, right? What is, I need to have my own thoughts clear and in order before I can produce a good essay, right? Sometimes that happens in iteration. Sometimes, and I actually do use Claude and ChatGPT to often help me iterate on my Substack writing. Not to just write it from scratch, but to sort of say, here's like the fragmented, messy outline of an essay that I have in my brain. Um, can you help me find the pattern here or help me rearrange this because I'm not certain what I'm trying to say, and I could use some like outside perspective on that, right? And so I think like in practice too, I think you find a lot of experienced software developers sort of say, yeah, I use these AI tools, um, but I'm not just sort of vibe coding and then shipping the software to production, right? I am like going back and forth with the AI. I am often editing what the AI has written. I'm reading everything, as much as I can, and reviewing it, because I think that is an integral part of the process, right? And until we come up with frameworks or languages that prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot, um, I think there is still a need for like good software engineering best practices.
Right, right. And regarding coding and software engineering, are you concerned about um, the vulnerability of the code and the security part?
I think to some extent, yes, but I think again that goes back to, you know, a human needs to be reading the code, right? And so I think if I see a app that somebody says, "Oh yeah, like I just vibe coded this entire thing. I like never actually read the code," uh, then I am 100% concerned about security concerns, right? Um, but if an engineer is using Claude or Cursor or ChatGPT as another tool in their toolkit, right? Um, then I am uh, then I am less concerned. Just like I wouldn't be overly concerned just because they used AI, right? I think then that falls back to like, okay, but like, how are you writing tests before AI? How are you, reviewing pull reviews, pull requests before AI, right? Um, that sort of thing.
And I know you have a very deep general knowledge about AI. So if we look towards the future, both in your own field and also more broadly, do you think that AI will continue to scale in, let's say, the next 10 years um, on a similar pace to how it has, scaled and developed over the last 2 to 3 years? We talked a bit about it earlier, but I would like to go a bit deeper into it.
Um, yeah, it's funny, the last, 2.5 years I've been writing my Substack, every Christmas I sort of do like a 10 predictions for next year about AI. And so far I don't think I have a very good track record of successfully predicting the future in this industry. We'll keep trying. We'll keep trying. But um, yeah, so take, everything I'm about to say with a very big grain of salt, right? This is one guy's opinion. Um, I think we're gonna see the perception of AI capability uh, slow down is my bet. And I think we're already seeing this, right? For folks, watching or listening who understand a bit more of the technical side of things, right? We saw um, the size of these large language models balloon tremendously, right? We don't know how big GPT-4, GPT-5 are, right? But it would not be unreasonable to assume that they are trillions of parameters, right? Which is, you know, thousands of times larger than anything we had built 10 years ago, right? And for the most part, I think we saw that as you continue to scale that up, you will get better results, more intelligence. Moving forward, you know, it feels like we are hitting a little bit of a wall, right? And that's kind of the $1 trillion question in the industry, right? Is are you going to get um, more and more breakthroughs? But it's getting harder to get those breakthroughs. One, because it's just so expensive to create these things, right? You know, by all accounts, uh, foundation models are now costing somewhere between 100 million and $1 billion to train the latest state of the art model, right? Um, and we are running out of more and more training data, right? You know, I remember I always found it very counterintuitive to learn that like when you build a bigger model, you actually have to give it more high quality data, right? Which you might just assume like, oh, but it's supposed to be smarter, so you can do more with less. But that's actually not the case, right? You have to find more and more sources of training data. And, you know, while we're trying things like synthetic data, while we're trying, you know, additional research techniques, I say we like I'm a researcher, not me. You know, it's still unclear like whether we're going to get that next order of magnitude jump, right? Even if we successfully scale the models another 10x in terms of like parameter count, right? Um, so I think even if we did go that next level, I don't know that it would feel like the same level between, for example, GPT-3 and GPT-4, because I think we're also at a point where the models are getting better at such specialized things that for the average person, you're not going to notice, right? The benchmarks that we're measuring these models against, you know, they're problems that are meant to be like solved only by PhD students, right? In, you know, biology, chemistry, mathematics. Um, and so for I don't know about you, but for me, like I never had a chance of solving any of the problems on that benchmark, right? And so, you know, the fact that GPT-5 can go from like 10% of those problems to 40% of those problems, or I'm making up numbers here, right? But whatever it is, um, it's not going to matter to me and my use case, right? It might matter to like pushing the boundaries of scientific research for some people. But I think the broad consensus will likely be that it doesn't seem like it's that much better, right? And in fact, I do feel like that's what has happened with GPT-5 for the most part, because I think the next level of mainstream perception of an intelligence jump is going to come from better product design and product engineering, not necessarily AI research breakthroughs.
Hmm. I've discovered that I actually prefer, like many other people, communicating with GPT-4 over GPT-5. The reason being that GPT-5 is a bit annoying because it's so, you know, it's more intelligent than me often. For instance, when I ask it to give me feedback on my writing, it can point out all kinds of weird stuff that I would never have thought about. And I'm kind of wondering, is this helpful to me? Is it actually 100% correct what it's saying? Or is it just a very sophisticated hallucination? Have you run into a similar issue?
I like I mentioned, I've been on leave, so I've not had a chance to play with GPT-5 as much as I would have liked. Um, I do definitely notice, I think, the lack of personality for the most part, right?
Hmm.
And I think that comes back to like, uh, you know, what I've been saying like about the perception of like, oh, this thing is really smart, I think is going to come from things like it remembers um it remembers things about you, right? Or it knows exactly which tool it needs to use from like the tools you've connected, right? Or it is able to bring a level of like emotional intelligence or reassurance, right? That a very like dry model is not going to have. And I think those things are going to go a long way. But um, yeah, so far with GPT-5, it I would kind of echo what you said. It does the job, right? And I can't really say that I'm unhappy with the answers it gives back. Um, I think when it comes to like my personal, you know, look inside my personal usage, ChatGPT I mostly use for a lot of task-based stuff. And I think when it comes from more creative expression or like brainstorming and stuff like that, I turn to Claude. I still have a Claude subscription, and like that, you know, uh, that tends to be a little bit more my style when communicating about creative stuff.
What about the Grok 4?
I have not tried Grok 4.
Okay.
I've been meaning to, but I would love to know your thoughts if you've been using it.
It's my favorite one, I would say. It's also a bit creepy sometimes. Like GPT-5 is a bit annoying. Grok 4 can be a bit, uh, what's the right word? Too many emojis,
Hmm.
too creative text, where it feels a bit strange. Sometimes it's good to have, just straight answers, but it's like an art form in itself to make these AI models communicate with users in a way that is nice. There's a problem if they become too smart, then people will get annoyed at them. And if they're, you know, less intelligent than the average AI model, no one will use them, right? So yeah, I'm testing out different models. I'm using Poe.com. Have bought a subscription there, so every time I have a question, I run it by the different models. So if it's like I want some information about a workout plan or something like that, I run it by Grok 4 and GPT-5 and Claude and Gemini and so on, just to compare their answers. And it's a very fun exercise, and they have different personalities, so to speak.
Cool. Yeah. It sounds like I definitely have to give Grok 4 a shot. I do think the personality aspect is a um, fairly interesting, I think, element, right? With like GPT-4o, it was mostly just the default personality. And I believe with GPT-5, they're working on like getting different personalities into it. Grok 4, you also have the like AI avatar personas, right? Um, and I think with Claude 2, you can sort of toggle between writing styles. Um, but there's to me, there's definitely a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of like letting people, customize the style that like feels most comfortable for them.
What about the agents? Do you still see a near-term future in that?
I forget who said it. I think it was Andre Carpathy who said like um, people have they spent most of the beginning of this year calling 2025 like the year of agents, right? And uh, I think what it is more likely to be is the year of like agent fundamentals, right? Like I think we're figuring out what are the primitives that make agents work. And I should also say this is my own personal soapbox. Um, Whenever somebody, especially if it is a like a marketing person from a SaaS company that is trying to talk to you about their AI agent, I think it is very important to like be clear about what the definition of agent is, um, because there are many, many things that have existed in software for a long time that if you squint your eyes a little bit, you could sort of argue that they are an agent, right? So like you could say like, oh, an agent is a system, a software system that like, is given a trigger and then performs some action on your behalf, right? Um, and I think with that lens, with that context, I would argue like, okay, does that mean like is a webhook an agent, right? Is a Zapier workflow an agent, right? Um, and so I think to me, to practice what I preach here, um, an agent is a piece of software that has the ability to like independently make plans, right? Um, to execute on those plans, right? Um, which is like which is to say it does more than like read and summarize, right? It like takes right actions or modifies data, right? And then three, like for the most part, while it can reach back to the user for confirmation or for assistance, it performs most of that loop just going back between like, hey, here's the plan, here's an action, here's the next step in the plan. it does most of that loop autonomously, right, without human intervention. Um, and so I think with that in mind, um, I tend to agree with Carpathi's view that like we're figuring out the fundamentals for making these things work, right? Because I think the vast majority of agents right now, one, are not sort of agents under my working definition, but two, aren't actually that good yet, right? I think we have figured out a couple of use cases, and I do get the sense that we're going to figure out sort of like use cases for agents, right? Like workflows. Um, we're progressing along this spectrum of task, right? Which is like what ChatGPT was very good at. Like I have a task, I want you to write a marketing email, right? Do the task. Or I want you to generate code for XYZ, do the task. And we've moved to workflows now with agents, right? And then eventually, I think the dream for a lot of the industry is to move to um, like roles or employees, right? So like, it's not enough to have a like coding agent. You want like an AI software engineer, right? And an AI engineering manager and an AI product manager, right? We're not there yet, although there's a lot of, marketing hype. But um, yeah, I think when it comes to workflows, we've figured out a couple of like very narrow workflows. Probably the most general right now is like code generation. I'd probably point to something like Claude Code as being like something that is reasonably good at the workflow, right? Um, Another one that I think we have started doing a reasonably good job at is like internet research. So I look at like deep research as an agent, and its workflow is like given this prompt, go and like research things on the internet, right? I think we're gonna add more. It's mostly read functionality, so it's kind of at the edge of that agent definition, but it is like taking actions to go read these websites, like mostly autonomously, and then it is coming back with a research summary for the user. Um, and so I think those are two of the first ones we figured out. The next frontier that a lot of people are trying to get to is browser use agents, right? So like there's so much of the internet that you can't really do with like a headless CLI, right? Like you have to be clicking and reading web pages and typing in text boxes. Um, and so I think the next, frontier for a lot of these companies is how do you get a really good browser agent. But I don't think we're there yet in terms of like having something that is reasonably good, right? I think it works in some cases, but it is still very flaky.
How would you communicate with such a browser-based agent that is faster than just typing? That's a part I don't really understand about using agents for web search, because most of the time it's quicker to just type or make your own reservations or book your own vacations or that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you lean into like the promise of agents, right? The idea is like, um, it's almost like if you would work with a remote coworker or a virtual assistant, right? Yes, you might be better and faster at booking your own flights than a virtual assistant. But the point of the virtual assistant is that like you just tell them the task and then you don't have to think about it anymore, right? And so, the promise is that if we get to a browser agent that is as good as a human just operating remotely, you then just sort of say, "Hey, book me flights to Hawaii," right? And obviously, one of the things we have to overcome is like the agent then needs to actually think about that and say, hold on, like, you know, I I don't know what dates he wants to book. I don't know what city he wants to, maybe from context it will know like where you live and therefore what city, right? It could make that assumption. But like which Hawaiian island do you want to fly into? How long do you want to stay? Do you want me to book a hotel, as part of that, right? Um, is it just you? Is your family going, right? All of these things, do you prefer window seat or aisle seat, right? And so I think that's all context that right now, in theory, you could get a browser agent to do, but you would have to think through all of those details yourself and like be very explicit about like all of those details up front, right? And
Hmm.
so the dream here is that you just tell the agent, book me a flight to Hawaii, and it is smart enough to like, you know, ask you those questions, right? To clarify its own plan, or perhaps even it goes out and says, hey, like, I already did the work because like it's, I'm a piece of software, so it's dirt cheap for me to do it. I went and just found three different itineraries for these dates. Is this what you had in mind, right? And then you could sort of, even skip half a step and say like, oh, actually, like this one's pretty good, but like change these dates, right? Um, and so I think that's where we want to get to, but like I said, still a little ways away.
Right, right. I think it would be lovely to have such an AI assistant like that. It will also reduce people's screen time and smartphone use. Um, so perhaps it could be a more healthy alternative, even to social media in the long term, in some weird way. But yeah, it's of course very theoretical.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you've had, I'd be curious to know if you've had thoughts or guests talk about actually AI's um, impact on social media, right? Because I think it's clearly happening already. Um, and I'm left wondering like when our social media feeds are inevitably filled with a lot of AI content, um, does that ultimately get people to take a break from social media,
Hmm.
or do we just continue scrolling and not care that it's AI generated content?
I thought about the same thing. On one hand, AI is kind of ruining many social media feeds, also because it's usually undisclosed. LinkedIn is the best example I can think of. You can easily tell that many of these posts are AI generated. People are saying the same thing in the same format with the same emojis and bullet points and all of that. But people don't disclose it. So it makes you want to use LinkedIn less, which might ultimately be good. So it's kind of paradoxical that on one hand, it kind of drives people away from social media, which is perhaps a net positive for society. That's what I'm thinking, but it could be a very interesting topic to dig deeper into at some point.
Yeah.
So if you talk with, let's say, a young high school student, and they wanted to get a job in software, is that something you would encourage them to do at this stage?
Oh man. I don't know. Um, I think the honest answer is I would tell them that they should, if they're interested in it, they should absolutely study programming and computer science, right? I've said for a long time, like I don't think everybody should become a programmer, but I do think everybody should try to program, right? To try to learn how to program at least once, because I think there is an enormous amount of value in being able to think, to break problems down into intermediate steps, right? To build abstractions around problems that you're trying to solve, to think in terms of systems, right? To think in terms of optimizations. No matter what career you have, I think that is a valuable skill set to have, right? So I'd probably say, in a time of so much uncertainty, start there, right? And then, you know, uh, I think if you have other passions, there is still likely going to be a decent amount of value in sort of saying like, I really love chemistry, right? And so like figure out what is that intersection of chemistry and software engineering, right? And figure out. I think for now there's still probably um, more opportunity for humans that are like able to be cross-disciplinary, right? And to like think about problems from different angles versus like uh, pure software. I still think, like I said, I still think it's a great time to learn. But yeah, I think I am hesitant to just sort of say like just go study computer science and hope for the best when it comes to like getting a job after, right? Because I know it's been. I mean, I think there was the recent the MIT survey
Right.
that came out recently. I think it was, it might have been someone else, but basically showing that like as a whole, post ChatGPT, like software development employment has stayed relatively steady um, until you look at the junior developer cohort, right? In which case it is like really, really taken a hit. And I think that's yeah, gets back to like what do you do if you're just coming out of college and I don't have a great answer.
Some stuff I've been thinking about. When I use a chat model to get feedback on my writing and I communicate with it, I've come to the realization that there's no way that I could objectively write better than an AI model. If I like competed in a competition in writing about AI and law versus a chatbot, I would probably lose most of the time. But still, writing is something I enjoy. And I think what gives writing value is writer to reader connection. If I read a passage that I can relate to emotionally, then I kind of form a bond with the writer somehow. I don't think AI is capable of really making that kind of connection with people. I've yet to read any AI generated text that I would like to engage more with. I couldn't see myself reading an AI generated novel, for instance. There wouldn't be any point to it because I couldn't get that reader to writer connection with it. Software is a bit different in that regard because it's very technical, of course. So perhaps the same, human aspect is not as important in coding as it is in writing. It probably isn't, right?
Yeah, and I think that that is something that gives me hope, right? For a lot of this stuff is like there's a lot of fundamental things where I think, and I say this as somebody who loves technology and who loves automation, there are a lot of fundamental things where people just prefer to deal with people, right? And like that is I think just like innate in who we are as animals, right? As Homo sapiens. And so for things like you said, reading poetry, right, or reading a novel, right, the fact that a human wrote it, or hearing the story and knowing that it was like for decades, right, like based on a true story, right, like that is the tagline of the movie because knowing that it happened to a real human, is meaningful to us. And so I think for a lot of things where it's like creativity or connection or education, right, there's still a strong bias towards having a human involved.
And even in something like chess, I play quite a lot of chess. And sometimes I could, watch Magnus Carlsen or some of the top chess players play the game, but never like AI bots. Even though they are much better, it's just not as fun. Even in that scenario, it's really hard to relate to them. And that's, I think, very important, just as you say. It's like a basic human instinct we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Like the best computers surpassed humans at chess playing capability a long time ago, and yet you know, chess is arguably more popular now than it's been in the last 20 years, right? With as it's gotten into streaming and it's gotten into more pop culture. And you still have like chess tournaments, right? Like, I've never seen people get super excited about an AI versus AI chess tournament, right? That just doesn't really happen to your point.
Hmm. So here towards the end of our talk, what about if we go even younger than high school students, down to like really young children? I know you recently had uh, a new child. What are your thoughts on raising a child in this new world we're living in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm evolving my thoughts all the time on this, right? I do think, I'm coming from a place of um, you do have to teach them, like you do have to teach kids about it, right? And I think especially, I really feel for old parents of slightly older kids, because I think by the time your kids are in middle school or high school, like clearly they are going to be exposed to it. Clearly, if not they, their friends are going to be, trying to cheat on homework assignments with ChatGPT, right? Um, but what is better for them is like sort of saying, teaching them how the tool works, the limitations, the fact that it can hallucinate, right? And like, is it ethical to use this thing even though you can? Um, you know, down the road because one, I mean, from parents I've talked to, like there are virtually zero schools right now that I've encountered that are proactively kind of addressing this with the kids, right? Some teachers are sort of embracing it. I think especially more at the university level and sort of saying like, feel free to use ChatGPT on this assignment, right? Like because the point of the assignment is not did you spit out the essay that looks correct, right? It was something else. Um, but in practice, for younger kids, I don't know. I think I'm probably in a place where it's like um, hold off on exposing them like very early. But I think that's also, that's not AI specific, right? Like I can tell you that we don't we don't have any smart home speakers in our house, right? And we have no plans to. So like my kids probably are not going to grow up saying "Hey Google" or "Hey Alexa," right? Um, because I think that's probably a thing where it's like I would like to structure how they are introduced to the world of like smart assistants and like searching the internet on demand, right? Um, and then after that, social media and just like broader internet usage. Um, but I do think it's a thing that you have to come to terms with eventually, right? Because um, you can't just ignore it and hope it goes away. I think at this point, hoping AI goes away is probably like hoping smartphones go away, right?
Mm. What about smartphones? Would you let your kids use smartphones, or how old do you think they should be before they can?
That's such a tough question. I mean, I think the answer is like it depends on every kid, right? You know, um, if my kids are early teenagers, I mean, I'm sure they're going to ask me for phones before then, right? In California, I think there's a growing trend of like entire classrooms taking a pledge together to like not use phones until they're 13 or 15 or whatever age. Um, because there is a big social aspect to it, right? It's not enough for like, I think as a parent to sort of say like, you're not allowed to have a smartphone. Especially if like 80% of their class has smartphones and are messaging each other on social media, right? Um, and so I think, yeah, there's, this, we're seeing in at least in my area right now, this bigger societal change of trying to get entire cohorts to do it together or entire schools to do it together.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know what the right age is. I think it's like being able to teach teach your kid, how to do things responsibly and um, you know, being able to like it's sort of like saying like when would you let your kid operate a power tool, like a power drill, right? And I think it's like it probably depends on the kid, right?
Mm.
Some kids will have grown up around, you know, construction workers, right? Like that's in their family and their parents know that they're responsible and they have no problems with them using power tools from 12, 13 years old, right? Other kids um, maybe are unfamiliar, but might take it slowly when they're 15. Other kids, it might be like, yeah, I don't think that's ever going to be a good idea to just like hand you a power tool and say good luck, right? Um, so I think it just really, yeah, really depends.
It was great chatting with you, Charlie. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It was great. All right, bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Futuristic Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for tuning in.